As I first started looking into nuclear war and some of the history, which, as far as actual usage and battle goes, there's very limited history. You're talking World War II in Japan. But what fascinated was, to me, was that they were both airburst strikes. So the atomic bombs were dropped and then they were detonated a certain distance above the ground. And as I was looking through some later scenarios and watching some of the more serious takes when it comes to films on nuclear war, like especially The Day After and Threads, both of them involve strikes that started with some high altitude air burst, but then mixing air and surface burst. So it made me wonder kind of what was the reasoning behind it and what did it affect. And so there are different effects depending on whether it's surface or air burst, but I'm going to look at it from a perspective of survivability. And so I'm going to use a scenario here where I place some people on here, and this is actually very close to home for me. And what I wanted to look at was if there were strikes made at a nearby army base. In this example, it's the Bluegrass Army Depot, where we were decommissioning chemical weapons up until just a few weeks ago. And so maybe it's still on some target designations from Russia, who knows. But let's just say that there's some detonations that happen there, and you're looking at a 3 to 4 mile distance. And we'll look at different sizes and different altitudes of strike. So I'm going to go with a single detonation. I'm going to look at, let's change down here. So let's choose a warhead. What do you guys think? Satan. That's kind of a ominous tone there. And let's start with a airburst at 500 meters. This is a 750 kiloton yield weapon. So several orders of magnitude above the atomic bombs dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. First, let's take a look at what happened to our people. So no casualties yet, as far as I can tell. Let's see here. And I positioned these people in different areas. So this gentleman was in a one-story frame building on the first floor. And he had light injuries from flying flying marijuana. Flying glass and debris. This person was in a 2-story brick building on the first floor. No effects. This individual was in a vehicle, so she suffered light injuries from flying glass and debris. Also first-degree burns, minor skin injuries similar to a sunburn, immediate pain followed by reddening of the skin. After some hours, the affected skin returns to normal. One thing to note in this, there's going to be almost no medical care for people with light injuries. None. You're going to have enough casualties that it'll overflow our medical system, so you can forget about any sort of thing like that. Cheryl Moore, 2-story brick building, no injuries. This was a 2-story brick building, no injuries. So he was on the first floor. She was on the first floor. And that was a mistake. She should have been in the basement. Oh, well. So she was in the basement, Leslie Marshall. I'm sorry. So nothing too serious. Look at overall casualties. And this is not going to be the most highly populated area, but we are looking at 45,000 casualties in the immediate after effect. Look at fallout dose. One thing that helps us is the fallout traveled east. So you would have seen far more casualties had the bomb struck here. Let's go back in. Let's load a scenario. So I'm going to start over from the beginning. Same thing. I'll make sure I got the people where they should be. So we got brick building, first floor. So we got an overlay here. 2 people in the brick building. We're going to move one of them to the basement. Going to strike in the same general vicinity, same size bomb. Single detonation. This time we're going to do surface burst. Okay. Take a look at our people. First floor brick building, just light injuries. Basement, no injuries. Basement, wood frame house, no injuries. First story frame building, no injuries. In a vehicle, same basic effects as the airburst. Casualties. Casualties, 39,263. Why would the casualties be less? Probably as a surface burst, you're going to see a little bit less fallout spread. Okay. So let's make this a little bit more interesting. Let's go back to 500 meters. We're going to choose a warhead. Let's move over to China. Let's work on a Dofang 4 Alpha. 3.3 megaton. So this is going to be some order of magnitude larger than the previous one. Let's see. And now you see we're within this certain amount of radius. So airburst. You can already see right away a significant difference. So let's take a look here. 2-story brick building. Moderate injuries from flying glass and debris. Appears to have survived initially. No worries about the dose. 2-story brick building. Moderate injuries from flying glass and debris. Seems to have survived. I should have changed this too. I forgot to change it when I saved it. But oh well. If they survived on the first floor, they'll survive in the basement. Basement of a first-story frame building. Killed in the fires. A little bit higher dose. First-story frame building. Moderate injuries. Killed in the fires. Injuries. Burns. Killed in fire. So we have 3 definite casualties and 2 most likely surviving, at least until looters and neighbors decide they want to eat them. Let's look at overall casualties. So you see an order of magnitude much higher. The first time airburst was 49,000 or 45,000, and the surface burst was 39,000. You see here air bursting at the 3.3 megaton. Fallout pattern goes all the way to Virginia Beach. Significant difference. And 255,000. So much different. But what would the difference be if it was surface burst? Same thing. I do want to make sure that we put the one person in the basement. So let's throw them in the basement. So let's do a single detonation. And let's change to 0. And let's go. Alrighty, right here, it seems like now we have 3 survivors instead of 2. Let's take a look. So, interestingly, Cheryl Moore, who was on the first floor of the brick building when it was airburst, she survived. And this one, she was killed on the fires. Basement survived. Basement of the wood frame survived, unlike previously. And in the wood frame building survived. So it seems like this is predicting that the fires would be more moderate with the surface burst versus the air burst. In the car, and this says incapacitated, but when it says high probability of infections and death without intensive early treatment, she's not getting that early treatment. She's dead. So let's see what the overall casualties would look like. A reduction, not in a great magnitude, but you're looking at 255,000 to 239,000. You're looking at the fallout pattern still reaching to Virginia Beach. So, still not a good time for anybody. Now, let us do something a little different this time as well. So what I'm going to do is, make sure everyone's where they should be. I'm going to put the ground zero much, much closer, but I'm also going to put a much more moderate warhead yield. And if you're wondering what that sound is, that's me drinking a beer. So let's go here. So this is going to be comparable to the atomic bomb detonated surface or air. And we're going to put ourselves right here. Let's see what happens. So we're talking about an atomic bomb being detonated, airburst, virtually right over top of us. And we saw 1,724 people killed. Everybody died. It seemed like they survived initially, but as time went by, crushed in a collapsed building, extreme radiation sickness, crushed by a collapsed building, crushed by a collapsed building, lung hemorrhaging overpressure. So, even with a much more moderately yielded warhead, you see that survivability at that close of range is almost non-existent, and rightly so. So, when it comes to nuclear war and survivability, it all factors into, probably more important than air or ground burst, is going to be the proximity and the warhead yield side, and where you're located. And so, a secure building, brick building, is going to be more survivable than a wood building most of the time. We did see some variation there. And there is at least some element of any type of building is going to be more survivable than being out in the open, which I didn't put in here because I didn't feel, if you're caught out in the open, it's, oops. So we're going to do the same thing. Sorry. And this time, though, ground burst it. Let's look at overall casualties first. So actually a ground burst and a lower warhead yield actually produced a higher amount of casualties than the air burst. So unlike some of the higher yields, we saw a little bit higher casualty rate. Let's take a look at our peoples. Radiation sickness and fires, collapsed building, radiation sickness, multiple causes. So one last one. Let's look at the difference between that and a conventional bomb with what we would consider a half a. Where was it putting it at? Half a kiloton to ground burst. So casualties, a fraction of what they were previously, 278. And this is a large conventional bomb, mind you. Interestingly, they still factored in radiation. So you're going to have to take that with a grain of salt. You could say crushed by a collapsed building. But the radiation sickness, I wouldn't take too much stock into this. I think it was, I'm not sure. Oh, you know what? It probably was the fact that I don't know. I have to play around with that a little bit more. Fault me for that one. So, but and to close the show, let's go to a very populated center. Let's go. Let's go back to our Dofang. Let's do a ground. I'm going to do it right on the K. $3.9 million surface. Now let's do the same thing. Go to air. This is just to give a slightly different perspective. I was looking at more survivability on a local level, but let's see the same thing though in a more densely populated area. Let's go 500 meter. Take a look. 5.1 million. So the airburst did cause a significantly larger amount of casualties by an order of magnitude of 1 million. So again, just a different way to look at it. But it would seem, under most circumstances, the airburst do drive more casualties than the surface burst. Neither one would be very pleasant. So I think this is a good time to probably cut it now. Hopefully this was informative to people and open up some dialogue and conversation around this. Stay tuned. Tomorrow I got my first gym equipment review video. I posted one of my gym, but doing the first review video should be up tomorrow. I have started some hobby videos and just kind of doing a lot of different content that I just want to do. So, appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.